Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle with the Sleep Coach School, and today I'm back for another open class. And today I am joined by Beth. Hi, Beth. How are you doing? Or Coach Beth, I should say, rather. How are you?
Good, good, Michelle. Ever since I graduated from the program, the best way to see you is to do an open class. So, which is
True. It's true. It's a great excuse, right?
yeah, that's right.
So true. Well, we've got a bunch of good questions today. We've got quite a few of them. So let's dive right into our first one. So our first question is from Alice, and she says, "Hi, I'm a 51-year-old perimenopausal woman who has started having a few sleep issues. Normally a good sleeper, except for a time during some short-term depression. Sleep issues sound very common in perimenopause due to hormone fluctuations. My question is if it can be alleviated with your techniques, or is the underlying hormone issue a different ballgame? I've been scanning your YouTube channel and I haven't seen this specifically addressed." Good point. Thanks for sending this in. So I want to pass it over to Beth. What do you think about what Alice is dealing with and asking about?
Yes, Alice, you are singing to the choir with this question because I am going through similar things with hormones. And I think you're right that it's very common for hormones to cause some sleep disruption. And I think that the key word there is disruption
Mhm.
versus insomnia. And this channel can be helpful in that it can help make sure that disruption doesn't lead to insomnia because it seems like so often people think it's the disruption that causes or caused insomnia, but it's not the sleep disruption as much as it is our response to the sleep disruption. And Michelle, I think it's so interesting how you can go like through some sort of sleep disruption, which can be almost anything. There's so many things that can cause sleep disruption. And depending on where you are in your life, how we kind of react to it. Things are relatively calm in life, and there's not too much else going on. We don't really respond to it much or worry or anything, and sleep sort of recalibrates and gets back on track. And then there's other times where if we have some sort of sleep disruption, like hormones, things are stressful, we might respond with some worry, or concern. And that's when we start going down, what's going on with my sleep? What does this mean? What's going to happen if this doesn't go away? And we, start going down Google rabbit holes and doing things to start trying to fix our sleep. And that's actually when insomnia can start, So just understanding that it is very normal to have some sleep disruption with hormones. I've totally got it on going on too. And there are a lot of things that you can do for that. I think it's a matter of just trying different things and finding something that can sort of bring that down a little bit. So those are my thoughts there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think those concepts that you raised of sleep disruption versus insomnia are so important because so often, just like you mentioned, it's the sleep disruption that can accidentally lead down a path to insomnia. We can really go from just having that disruption, which means, we might have some sleeplessness, but there's no real struggle, worry, fear, anxiety. And it's really that mental component with all that fear and anxiety and struggle that is insomnia.
Yes.
And it's so easy that one can kind of lead to the other. So I think, Alice, when it comes to what you're talking about, this channel and the teachings on this channel are going to be really helpful for preventing insomnia,
Right.
actually developing, and to be able to distinguish between the two. And I think that's really helpful, since in so many cases, I know in my case, my insomnia did start because of a sleep disruption from going off of a medication. And if I had known that my response to that experience was important or that it mattered, I think things may have been different, but I didn't know. And I started to get really worried and really scared about the sleep disruption that was happening, which was at the very beginning, it was a medication withdrawal that was actually quite normal to happen. But as it continued, I became more and more scared, more and more fearful. I started to dive deep into problem solving. I started to go deep into hormones and everything else. And I think that's what starts to kind of bring us down that rabbit hole, that can start to become problematic. So I think going back to those two concepts of sleep disruption, which is just sleeplessness without the struggle, versus insomnia, which is really that the mind piece of this, the anxiety, the fear, the struggle that we have, and how different they are. And I'll steal one of Daniel's sayings, because it was one of the first sayings, if not the first saying that I heard on the first video that I watched on this channel. Was I heard Daniel say, there are hundreds of things that can cause sleep disruption, but only how you think of them can cause insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, oh, that's very interesting. And that was sort of my first of many light bulb moments. So that's the quote I want to leave you with, Alice, to think about on that front.
That's good.
All right, so let's move on to our next question. Our next question is from Kevin, and he says, "Hi, I'm just wondering how I learned to deal with the anxiety of getting into bed after having a couple of night waking panic attacks, as it's causing my insomnia to get worse, and I'm having to use more meds to fall asleep." All right. So thanks for sending this question, Kevin. I really empathize with this question. I've experienced several panic attacks in the past, especially during my insomnia. You mentioned having panic attacks that were waking you up at night. I experienced those as well, and I know how deeply unpleasant those can be and how scary they can be. And I think the first helpful thing to know around panic attacks, whether they're happening at night or during the day, is that they're really just an overactivation of our body's very normal stress response. So that fight or flight stress response that we hear about. And so panic attacks feel like something really different and really unique and very dangerous, when in fact they're really just the overactivation of a very natural stress response. And so I think the first thing to know is that as awful as they feel, they're actually very safe to experience. One of the first things that tends to happen is we start to get afraid that something really bad is happening to us. And that creates a lot of fear and a lot of panic in response to the panic. So we can kind of catch ourselves sometimes going through these reactions where we start to become afraid of the fear or panic in response to the panic. And that kind of creates even more panic response. So I think that's the first piece, is to start to notice how you're responding when the actual panic attack starts, because it's very normal to respond with more panic, more fear, because we're afraid of what's happening. So that's the first piece, is know that it's overactive. It's an overactivation of a very normal stress response. It's not going to hurt you. And as much as we can move away from responding with more fear and more panic, the more it really does help. And a big part of this is that once we start to have a panic attack, or in your case, Kevin, you're mentioning waking up and you're already in the middle of one, there's nothing we can do in that moment to just stop the panic attack in its tracks. We can't just turn it off. And, and even during those moments, when we're in a panic attack, the thinking part of our brain largely goes offline. So you might notice that trying to think your way out of a panic attack also isn't really helpful. And trying to think your way out just feels more stressful, probably. So it's very normal that part of your thinking brain is going offline. It's supposed to. That's very normal. And so really one of the best things to do in those moments is to see if you can actually allow the panic to happen, and to see if you can actually stay with it without trying to escape it, without trying to run or push away. And almost like seeing it as a large wave in the ocean, and kind of needing to ride the wave of your own panic attack, for the sake of a better analogy. We can't stop the wave it's there, but we can learn to ride it in such a way that it's a little bit better for us. And so it's like we want to learn how to work with our panic attack as opposed to against it. And so there are a few things that you can do that can help you be with the panic attack. And I had mentioned the thinking brain really goes offline, so we don't want to focus there. We want to focus on ways that we can kind of drop into our body and help our body and support our nervous system through the panic attack. And three ways that you can do that, that you can kind of play around with, are deep breathing exercises. And this can be helpful to sort of practice beforehand so that it's not the first time when you're in the panic attack. And of course, if you're doing some deep breathing and you find it's making the panic worse, you want to let that go. You can also try something like progressive muscle relaxation, because progressively relaxing your muscles is going to communicate to the very part of your brain that's panicking that it can start to calm. And breathing deeply and slowly does the same thing. And even something as simple as pacing around a room, that movement, it can help to kind of burn off a little bit of that excess adrenaline that the body is creating during a panic attack. So that can be helpful as well. But I would say play around, Kevin, with different things. Remember that your thinking brain's going to go offline in those moments. That's normal and okay. And think about ways you can drop into your body and kind of help yourself be in your body and allow the panic to actually happen, even though it feels really uncomfortable and scary, knowing that it can't hurt you. So I hope that makes sense. I want to pause there and pass it over to Coach Beth for a moment and see kind of what you think of that approach, or if this has ever happened to you.
I think everything you said is amazing, and I love the wave analogy. And I picture a giant ocean wave. Like there's just no way that we could physically stop that, but we can work with the wave and use our body to maneuver with the wave. And I love the idea of just bringing yourself back into your body. And sometimes, I mean, that can be so different with everyone. And just like you said, just playing around with what works for you. And that I like too, that discharging that adrenaline, that anxiousness, by pacing, that can be wonderful. Sometimes just putting your hand to heart, just making that contact with your body just sends that little message of safety to the nervous system. There's just a lot of little things you can do. And I think just knowing that there's nothing wrong with your brain, just having that knowledge of what it is and what's happening in and of itself can take away some of the fear and anxiety around having a panic attack. So
absolutely. It's so important, just to know that it's not going to hurt you, even though it feels awful.
And it feels like it. It feels
like it.
It's very convincing when you're having one that the world is ending.
You should go to the hospital immediately, right? It feels sometimes like a bit of a heart attack.
It is. It's very scary.
Yeah, it's very scary, especially the first few times. And even when it is so unpleasant. And I know something that I would do sometimes when I was having, a panic attack, sometimes I would, if I didn't feel like walking or pacing, because that's why I said self-experiment with some of these things. There's not one size that fits everybody. Sometimes I would find walking or movement helpful. Other times I didn't want to get up, and I would lay down. I would put my legs up the wall. Since that's one of the yoga poses that's really great for helping to relax the nervous system. So I would lay with my legs up the wall in my bedroom, and I would bring my arms out to the side, and I would practice softening my body and allowing all of the sensations to come into my body. And I would squeeze my fists, and then I would release them, and I would squeeze them and release them. And just that act was like this idea of like relaxing. Every time I would release the fist, I'm now softening as I do the release. It was like now soften. And like Beth was saying, sometimes I would lay and I would have my hands on my heart. As well as something I would do. So I wouldn't say there was one thing that I did.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is the one thing. There were a few different things, but they were all body based.
Yeah.
It was all about helping me to stay with it, to be
Mhm.
with it, and to really allow the discomfort of it, knowing that
Yes.
it's going to end. It's not going to last
Mhm.
forever. And I think the other piece around this is when we do these things, when we're dropping into our body, it's not as though it's going to make the panic stop in its tracks. Because I
Mhm.
think I mentioned at the beginning, we can't make it stop in its tracks.
Yeah.
But sometimes if we're able to drop into our body and help ourselves feel it, allow it, if we're able to calm the nervous system a little bit, the duration of the panic attack can actually be a little bit shorter. And so we won't know that in the moment, or even necessarily in hindsight, right? Because we don't know what it would have been. But a lot of the times we can actually impact the duration of
Mhm.
our own panic attacks by doing these approaches, as opposed to, of course, if we respond with more panic and more fear, it will typically prolong,
Yeah.
the panic attack. Um, so those were some of my thoughts on
I
that.
just had another one that I think we learned together was just sometimes even just being in the fetal position.
Yeah. Yes, we did
There
learn that
Yeah,
together.
yeah, just
Yeah.
like there's something about that that's very comforting as being in that fetal position. This just came to mind.
It is. It's a calming position.
Yeah.
And if you've never tried it, I highly recommend it. You don't have to wait for panic. Just lay in the fetal position for
Yeah.
5-10 minutes, and you'll notice that it has a bit of a calming impact. And so I didn't know that at the time, so I never tried that
Yeah.
during my moments of
I had
panic.
never heard it either. So, yeah.
I would try that now after learning that. I would add that on for things to try, and it's so important to try different things. And so,
Yeah.
Kevin, think dropping into your body, and think kind of about self experimenting a little bit with anything that's going to help you be with it. Allow it and make space for it, and that's what's going to help. So I hope that helps. And feel free to ask any questions you may have about that in our comment section, as always. Let's keep moving to our next question. Our next question is from Diane, and she says, I'm a 41-year-old female, and I struggle with night eating. I fall asleep easily at night, but no matter what time I go to bed, I wake up almost exactly 1 hour after falling asleep. Then I feel compelled to go to our kitchen and eat in the middle of the night before I can fall asleep again. Some nights I will then wake up 1 to 2 more times every 2 hours or so and eat again. This has been happening on and off for the past few years. I've worked with a nutritionist to make sure I'm eating enough during the day. I journal at night before bed, and I've used locks on my bedroom door to remind me to stay in my bedroom and not eat. This will usually work for a few weeks at a time, but it always seems to come back, or I find a work around the locks in the middle of the night. This behavior is very distressing to me. It causes me to gain weight, oversleep in the morning, and feel less alert at work. But despite having a plan to journal or read instead of eat when I wake up, I cannot seem to overcome the compulsion to eat. I'm aware of the eating. I'm not sleepwalking. If you have any tips, I would love to hear them. Okay. So I want to pass this one over to Beth. Beth, what do you think?
Yeah. This is such an interesting question, Diane. Thank you for sending it, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. And a lot of things come to mind with this question. I don't think it's that unusual to have a sort of a compulsion around food, because I think that food is associated with so many good feelings. When you think about how food is represented almost universally around, it's used as a reward, it's used in celebration, it's used to bring communities together. You think about grandma baking cookies, how much love, your first malts at Bridgman's, like so many comforting feelings around food. So that part makes sense. That I don't know when this behavior was sort of established, if there was some insomnia going on at the time, but I can see how if we do something like go to the fridge to eat in the middle of the night and we repeat it enough times, the brain can, like the survival part of our brain can become convinced that the action is absolutely necessary for our survival.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it becomes a bit of a deceptive brain message over time and can become an obsession or a compulsion. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz comes to mind. He did this amazing research on OCD. And he talks about this, about how a behavior can come like a bit of a brain lock. You know, it's like that switch gets turned on and it just becomes a repetitive pattern that we feel compelled to repeat. And it's because the survival brain has come to believe that that's what's necessary. But he also talks about how you can manually unlock the brain through, you know, conscious awareness. Some of the things that we talk about, you know, noticing when we're in a pattern like this. Like, it sounds like, Diane, you are, because you're aware of what's happening, but not in judgment, not in any sort of like instilling a lot of self-kindness about what's happening with this pattern, and allowing it to just exist and noticing, like, look what my brain is doing. This is very interesting. It's telling me I need to do this pattern right now. And it generally is, almost everything we do as human beings is to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Mm-hmm. So when we know that, you know, things can maybe make more sense. And I'm just sort of speaking out loud about what's coming up, like with this question, because it's so interesting. But being aware, like, okay, this is what my brain is doing. There's probably some sort of safety mechanism at play here. And then redirecting, like it sounds like you have, by doing a different activity. Now, I think that discomfort that comes from doing something else, like you mentioned journaling, I'm not sure what else here, that can be really rough. You know, that, like, tackling it from a place of just sheer will, like, I've got to change this pattern, that can be hard. And I think about going into a place like, what does it mean for you to change that pattern? Like, what will that mean in your life? What is the intrinsic value of doing it differently to help create a new pathway? Those are some of the things that I wrote down here. What do you think, Michelle? What are your thoughts when you read this question? It's just fascinating.
It really, yeah, definitely. It really is. And I love that you brought up all the kind of love and the comfort that we associate with food.
Yeah.
Every culture. It's very,
yeah, it is almost universal.
It really is. And I think there's so much emotion behind food. There's so much comfort behind food.
Yeah.
There's so much there. And, you know, when I was reading this question, one of the first things I thought of, because I do think there sounds like, you know, with this, Diane, there's an element of confusion of what's going on, what's behind this, what could be underlying this. And of course, we can't know for sure based on reading one question, but one of the things that came to mind was, when this comes up in the middle of the night and you have the compulsion to go and eat, what happens? What emotion is going to come up for you if you don't eat? Like, what comes up in that moment? So if you don't satisfy the compulsion, what is coming up? Is it anxiety, fear, sadness? Just kind of throwing out some examples. And so what is it that the compulsion or the eating is preventing, right? And then to know what it's preventing, you can see what comes up if you don't do it in that moment for a bit of length of time, enough that it's going to come up and you're going to notice some level of pain or discomfort, and to sort of see. It could be that there's a fear if you don't eat, that you won't be able to fall asleep. Maybe it is quite tied to sleep, and there's a lot of fear. If I don't have this food, I won't be able to sleep. So that could be something, but it might not be. It might not be connected to that. It could be, instead, what comes up is an intense amount of anxiety around this. And then the issue could be more about anxiety itself as opposed to necessarily fear around sleep. And so that was kind of where I went when I was reading it, is what happens when she intentionally holds off and
Right.
sees what is coming up and is intentional about dropping into her mind and body to feel and to see, okay, let me observe for a second and really, really try to identify the feeling.
I just something came to mind while you were talking, and I had this friend, and he was the youngest of six, and his mother had had six kids in 6 years. So, wow, her.
Yeah.
But so he was the baby in the family, and mealtime for him was a little bit dicey because
It would be.
with 8 people at every meal, the food would go fast. And if he didn't get in there and get to the food quick, he would go hungry. He'd be hungry. He wouldn't feel satiated. And so that feeling of kind of moved into adulthood as well. Like he would eat really fast and eat and make sure, because to him, not eating meant going hungry and not feeling satiated. So there's a lot of things that can go with food and how it makes us feel.
Yeah, I completely agree. There can be a lot underlying that emotion.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, typically, if you're able to, Diane, in the moment, hold off, even if it means you do eat, give like later that night, hold off for a moment to see what comes up.
Yeah.
Just for your own self-experimentation with this, your own see if you can approach it with curiosity as opposed to fear or negativity or anything like that. Just to be curious of what sort of emotions, what sort of thought patterns are going to come up. And I think that's a good starting point in that space to kind of learn a little bit more about what could be underlying that. Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah. No, definitely. Very common one and really good question. So thank you for writing that in. And of course, feel free to comment in the section below with any follow-up questions for us as well. So let's move on to our fourth and our final question for this open class. This question is from Marcin, and she says, the last 4 months of my life have been my biggest obstacle. My biggest obstacle is staying asleep. I wake up after 2 to 3 hours of sleeping, and I can't get back to sleep. I always used to be an active person before my sleep got bad. I still try to stay active throughout the week, but not as much, as I see the outcomes of not sleeping on my health. I just want to figure out the reason this is happening. I know to some level it's my anxiety, but I never really had anxiety in my life. I'm only 24. I know when my sleep went away, I was under a lot of stress, personal guilt, and unhappy with myself, but I didn't know it could affect me this much. I did go through a breakup as well. I want to find a way out of it as I'm very worried about my health. When I'm awake, most times I try to do muscular relaxation strategies and think of something positive. Other times I read a book for a bit and then try sleeping again, but I don't sleep. Most times when I wake up, I need to use the washroom, so now I try not to drink a lot of water at night. Any recommendations? Right. So great question, Marcin. And thanks for writing in. And very common what you're describing. Very, very common. So nothing unusual on this front. And one of the main things to know is often when we start having problems with our sleep, we start to react in a very common pattern. And that's what I'm seeing, right? There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of worry around our health, the future of our sleep. And we start to go into problem solving mode. And we start to do a lot of things to try to fix it, which makes sense on the surface. Of course, that's how we would approach any problem in life. And unfortunately, that sort of problem solving mode that we go into is not helpful for our sleep. And it actually reinforces our own insomnia cycle without us really realizing it. And that's what can make insomnia kind of frustrating and a bit paradoxical, is because the types of problem solving we do that work really well in other areas of our life don't work well for our insomnia, and they really just keep us stuck. And if you've heard Daniel or myself talk about sleep efforts on this channel, that is also a great place to go, Marcin, if you want to search sleep efforts and learn a little bit more. And so when you were talking about, for example, doing progressive muscle relaxation and trying to get yourself to sleep, among a couple other things that you're doing on this front, and it's not working. And so that's one of the reasons it doesn't work. Now, I'm a big fan of progressive muscle relaxation, don't get me wrong. The only problem with this practice or any other type of practice, whether it's muscle relaxation, meditation, reading a book, anything, the moment the intention behind it is, I'm going to do this so that it makes me sleep.
Mhm.
And the moment we're doing it with that underlying need for control or attempt to force our sleep, it tends to backfire because it ends up unintentionally reinforcing to our already scared brains that not sleeping is a huge threat. And so the more we reach for these things, the more we're accidentally reinforcing that being awake at night is a huge threat. And the more our insomnia cycle continues. And then the more we reach for things and the more we try to problem solve, and we can really easily get stuck. So I did want to kind of highlight that that could be why some of the things you're doing right now to try to fix your sleep aren't working. And it's because fundamentally we can't exert this direct control over our sleep. And the more we try to do that, the more we can get stuck in insomnia. And the other thing I would say that it's really normal that you would be going through some sleeplessness. I mean, what you described with going through a lot of stress, going through a breakup, having these types of big life events can very naturally disturb our sleep. And the only issue comes when we start to become very fearful that that is happening, and we start to kind of fall into a lot of fear and panic around it. And then that very natural sleep disturbance, which would happen with anybody in response to stress, can start to build and turn into more of insomnia, which is really characterized by that anxiety and that fear and that struggle. So I know that's a lot. I want to pause there and pass it over to Beth for a moment. What do you think about what Marcin is struggling with right now?
I think that you said it, Michelle. I think this is like all about the foundations. It's that there's nothing we can do to control sleep, and insomnia is about the struggle. And it's when we're trying to chase sleep that we unintentionally perpetuate the cycle of insomnia. So sleep is a letting go process.
Yeah.
It's something that happens in the absence of effort, and your body knows how to do it. When there, like Michelle said, when there's periods of sleeplessness, nothing's gone wrong. That's very normal too. And I think just, you said somewhere in there that you want to figure it out. And I think just knowing what insomnia is and why it's happening can help you let go of some of the problem solving and the fear around what's happening. So, and really the only thing, like, the bottom line is there's just nothing we can do to make ourselves sleep. And just like, it's like there's a lot of truth and relief in that, and then there's a lot of frustration in that at the same time. But it's like the only thing that will give you sleep is being awake, and that's really it. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers that.
Yeah. No, I really agree. And I think at this point, Marcin, you're at the beginning, and it's a really good spot to be learning everything that you're learning on this channel, and to know that really the answer is to start to release some of the desire for control, start to step away from that struggle a little bit, and see if you can start to, as Daniel says, befriend wakefulness, and which really means like, can you start to allow and accept what is happening right now? Can you make it a little, even just a little bit more pleasant and okay for you to be awake at night? And of course, none of us want to be awake at night. So, I mean, I understand that. But can you reinforce to yourself that if you are awake at night, you're still okay, you're still safe, even though it's not ideal? And knowing that the way that you are mentally and emotionally responding to your insomnia is really going to be very important, and is going to be a major driver and can really help kind of bring this struggle to an end, which is really what has started happening. and it helps you kind of step out of that struggle. And once we step out of the struggle, we don't really have insomnia anymore.
Right.
We have some sleep disruption.
Yeah.
But we don't have insomnia anymore because we're not in the struggle of it. I think that's really important. All right. Well, those are our questions for today. I hope that helps everyone. Please, as always, feel free to write in questions anytime. Feel free to add your comments below, and we'll do our best to answer them. And I just want to thank Beth for joining me today, and always for some open classes. Thanks so much.
Good to see you, Michelle.
Thank you. I will see you soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.